Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Baltimore WordPress Meetup. Tonight's topic is Core Web Vitals, and we have a special guest. And I don't want to mispronounce your last name, so if you could just introduce yourself quick.
Sure, I'm Daniel Bachhuber.
Excellent. This is our meetup for December 14th, 2023. The Baltimore WordPress Meetup is an informational gathering. Please use the information, products, and services that we show at your own risk. Just because we are showing a website, plugin, theme, or anything else is not an official WordPress endorsement of that. Make sure to keep everything family friendly, as many of us are attending from home. The Baltimore WordPress Meetup group does our best to follow the community standards of the WordPress Meetup groups, which means that if you engage in spamming or spammer-like behavior, you will be evicted from the meeting. We have people of all different skill levels and backgrounds, so there's no judgment for people who are at a different level than where we are at. And of course, don't be a jerk. Some thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Anfira LLC. Anfira helps companies serious about their WordPress development needs. They specialize in helping agencies and businesses that are frustrated by their WordPress challenges. For more information about them, you can visit the website and get help with your WordPress. And link will be going in the chat. Our second sponsor to thank is the Easy Alley Guide. The Easy Alley Guide works to make web accessibility easier to implement through done-for-you tools and processes. For more information on web accessibility, including tools, tutorials, and more, please visit their website at easyalleyguide.com. And our final sponsor thank you is to Paul OBrien, who sponsors our video recordings and prepares them for YouTube. Paul, if you have a link that you'd like to toss in the chat, please do. Some quick admin before we get started with our guest. We will be using the Zoom chat to queue up questions, so please go and find your Zoom chat. Everyone will be muted to start. If you have a specific question and you want to voice it, you can just put a question mark into the chat or list your question out and say you'd like to speak, and we'll give you permission to unmute. No one knows everything, but we'll do our best to answer your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Daniel.
And here we go. Thanks everyone for having me. I'm Daniel. I'm based over in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. So it's 3 o'clock for me earlier in the day. Like Jen said, we'll use chat for questions as we go along. Today we're talking about Core Web Vitals. And to kick things off, I'd love to know your name. Feel free to put it in chat. How you self-identify. So are you a site owner, a blogger, a business owner, a web developer, and what you're hoping to learn. So feel free to use the chat and drop questions in and commentary in as you have it as we go along. We'll have a few key points in the presentation where we'll take questions, and then we'll also have an open Q&A at the end. So Jen will be monitoring chat more actively than me to flag, kind of any questions anyone has or clarification folks want, that sort of thing. So Core Web Vitals, Baltimore WordPress Meetup. If you're not headed to Baltimore today, you might want to get on the right flight. Bad dad joke there. A little bit about my background. I work on the WordPress.com's hosting offering. I am a software engineer and I lead a team called YOLO. I named it myself for a very good reason. My team is based all over the world. So I have a teammate in Spain, a teammate in Poland, a teammate in Greece. We're adding a teammate in Pittsburgh next month. I have a teammate in Thailand. It's a pretty fun job for me. I also help maintain WP CLI, WordPress's command line interface. I'm actually back at it. I maintained it by myself for a few years, actually took a few years away from the WordPress community. And since joining Automatic again, I'm helping out maintain WP CLI. So I won't take WP CLI questions during the course of the presentation, but at the end, if you have any sort of WP CLI questions, I'd be happy to field those too. In my prior job, I worked for a food blog called Pinch of Yum, and that's largely where my core web vitals and a lot of my website performance optimization experience comes from. So I know some, I think I know a fair bit, and that's the kind of context for my knowledge. And yeah, again, thanks Cheryl for chiming in. I'd love to learn more about where y'all are based, how you self-identify, what you're hoping to learn today. And actually, the enlightened self-interest for me is where do you host? So I'm gonna just fiddle with my settings a little bit too. So today's focus is all about demystifying core web vitals. So you might have heard about core web vitals. You might have, looked into it before. Someone might have said, hey, you know what, your core web vitals scores are bad. And so you look at your largest contentful paint and you see, oh, it's 3.1 seconds and it's in the yellow, and yellow seems worse than green, at least as we're driving on the road. So, but I'm not quite sure what this means or what to do about it. Or maybe you've looked at your cumulative layout shift and you see, oh, it's just at the edge of green. So I don't have to worry about that one at all. Or, you've been working on your site for a while and your time to first byte is in, squarely in the yellow and going into the red. And you're like, oh, this seems pretty bad. I'm not sure, how to handle that. And so today is all about core web vitals. We'll take it in 3 sections. First, we'll just cover what are the core web vitals. What am I referring to when I talk about core web vitals? Second, we'll go into each metric at greater depth. And then third, we'll talk, kind of tactically and high level about how do I improve my core web vitals. I won't be able to provide an answer to everyone's questions as to how do I improve this part of my website, but my hope is that you'll have at least 2 or 3 takeaways from today's event that will point you in the right direction on solving issues for yourself, or figuring out where to go further to learn more. So first up, what are the core web vitals? Easy answer, it's all in one slide. The core web vitals are a set of metrics that represent a distinct facet of user experience. They're measurable in the field, and they reflect the real-world experience of a critical user-centric outcome. So very specifically, core web vitals are the top 3. So when you hear core web vitals, we're talking about largest contentful paint, we're talking about first input delay, and we're talking about cumulative layout shift. Maybe I'll just keep calling it CLS so I can avoid saying that today. There's other notable metrics too. So when you look at, say, page speed insights on from Google, first contentful paint, interaction to next paint, and time to first byte are also often listed. But when you hear core web vitals, we're talking about largest contentful paint, first input delay, and CLS. And these are metrics that Google's opinion are the most important metrics to focus on for your website after years of research and years of attempts at educating site owners on how to improve their performance of their site. So, it's an opinionated thing, Google's opinion. Google controls Google search, and so it might be worth listening to Google's opinion. And it's really a focus on a subset and what they think are the most important after years of research. Another important note is that core web vitals primarily deal with perceived front end performance. And so performance of my website is this big picture, big sphere. Core web vitals is some very tiny points on that big sphere, and perceived front end performance is part of that sphere, but back end performance is another part of that sphere. As a site owner, you might be running a report using your e-commerce software, and that's slow. And typically the slowness in the back end is, at least it can be distinct from slowness on the front end. And Core Web Vitals is really focused on the front end perceived performance by your visitors. So raise your hand virtually. I can't actually see everyone, but you can chime in if in chat if you've seen this before. Before Core Web Vitals, you had Google PageSpeed Insights, and part of that was your performance score. And on your performance score, you had a breakdown of your different opportunities to improve your performance. And this is actually pretty close to my experience with Pinch of Yum. Pinch of Yum had spent less time on Core Web Vitals and more on this performance score. And it's kind of like, okay, here's a list of things, and now I got to figure out how to improve it. And I think if I improve these, then I'll end up with a faster site. Months go by, we've made progress on one or two, one's gotten worse, probably because of ad networks. I'm tearing my hair out. It's so frustrating. So Core Web Vitals are, better. It's a better set of metrics. Maybe an easier set of metrics or a more clear set of metrics to grok than, what do I do, to make sense out of this. They're also a lot better. Before you had your performance score, you had your request waterfall. And I remember spending lots of time, hey, we need to make the site faster. Okay, what does faster mean? Well, let's look at the request waterfall, and let's look at the order in which all the assets are being downloaded and whether or not they're being downloaded concurrently and blocking one another, and at what point the DOM is loaded and ready, and and try to improve the performance by, poking at this. Easy solution, right? Oh, I just need to minimize and concatenate all these assets. Boom, done. So, again, Core Web Vitals is, after years of research, Google's opinion on, hey, you know what, if you optimize for these Core Web Vitals, these metrics actually represent the things that are closest to the user's, experience of your site. Core Web Vitals are much better to optimize for than, figuring out this request waterfall and what to remove and how to optimize these bits. Because even if you change these bits around, maybe they improve Core Web Vitals and perceived front-end performance, or maybe they don't. Now, the question that everyone wants to know, do Core Web Vitals impact SEO? And the answer from some random blog on the internet that I'm treating as authoritative in this regard, I think we'll share the slide. Actually, well, I'm not going to try to copy the link, because last time I tried to copy stuff from a slide, it messed my slideshow up. We'll share the slides. I'll share the link in the Meetup group. I trust this source. I forget the actual website off the top of my head. This person did a bunch of research looking at, hey, you know what? In 2018, Google announced this, and here was the, how they communicated on the webmaster's blog, and combined a bunch of research into this assessment. And what this assessment says is, hey, you know what? Google will take URL level Core Web Vitals data into account when ranking, as long as they're all passed. But if they aren't all passed, then you're not necessarily going to get penalized for it. And so, okay, what does that mean? Should I do that or not? It's probably worthwhile to, get your Core Web Vitals in check. In part too, because, like back in the day, the performance score was really, could be negatively impacted by ad networks. And these days, the ad networks have kind of caught up, and the Core Web Vitals are less about, oh, you've got a bunch of JavaScript running on the page, as long as that JavaScript is running in a performant manner and isn't negatively impacting Core Web Vitals. An important call out. Oh, hey, thanks for finding that link. Boom, done, solved. Thanks, Jen. Important note to
internet.
Go ahead.
The power of internet searches.
Yeah, right. I mean, and I'm going to get to this, but Chat GPT and Claude AI are even more powerful. Important note too, and this I didn't really It's like easy to get stuck in the weeds and narrowly focused on something. Lab data isn't the same thing as crux data. Crux data, so when you hear crux data, what that's referring to is real world observed data that Google instruments through Chrome. Lab data is when you run, your site URL through Google Lighthouse or Google PageSpeed Insights, and your core Web Vital results may differ between lab data and crux data, because again, crux data is the observed data from, a large enough number of visitors in order to create a statistically significant data set, and in an average over all of that, and a variety of network conditions. Maybe someone's requesting your site from, a bad cellular network where, they have a bad connection and they have a slower phone. And then another person has the brand new MacBook Pro and is requesting your site. And it's kind of aggregating all of that and averaging it. Whereas the lab data, when you run a report in Google PageSpeed Insights, that's just doing a one-time run of your site from some web server somewhere. So I just want to call that out because it's an important nuance. And Google may be seeing a different core Web Vitals score than what you're seeing in your lab reports. Before I proceed into, hey, what does each metric mean? Are there any questions that we should cover so far?
We've got a question from the chat. Cheryl wants to know about core Web Vitals versus GT metric and why they can be so different.
Okay, great question. I don't have much personal experience with GT metrics. Jen, do you, by chance?
I do. I have used GT metrics quite a bit. I mean,
Okay.
the basic answer is they use different algorithms.
Okay.
And focus on different things.
Okay. And what does GT metrics give you then?
So GT metrics, various reports I've just run. So it basically gives you they do Web Vitals, which is largest contentful paint, time to first byte, and CLS. And they give you a performance grade and a structure grade. And then they give you that fun-filled waterfall chart where, of course, you see everything, and those are so fun to read.
Sure.
And then they focus on their top issues, and they give you scores based on major impact, medium impact, low impact, and which of the various things that impact relates to. So for example, if an image doesn't have explicit width and height set, then that's going to be a medium impact, and it's going to impact your CLS, because when the image doesn't have dimensions, it doesn't know how much space to reserve until it actually loads the image.
Cool. So it sounds like, GT metrics is another tool that you could use. Remember earlier on, I said, hey, what? Core Web Vitals is Google's opinion on these are the metrics you should focus on for performance, and these are the metrics that we care about. GT metrics has a different set of opinions where they've even, reprioritized Google's Core Web Vitals. It's up to you as a site owner to decide. I think the state of things these days is still generally better than what it was before, when you had a request waterfall or that performance kind of list of performance issues to address to go through. Jen, were there any other questions that we want to hit before we move on?
No, I think that is where we're at.
Cool.
You're good to go.
So let's cover each metric. So I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before. Oh, I mentioned it to Jen. I gave a version of this talk with the Bend WordPress meetup in September, actually. And at the time, I only had access to Dolly 2. Dolly 3, they had teased, but they hadn't yet released, or it wasn't publicly, or at least I wasn't cool enough to have access to it. So in September, Dolly 2 gave me this image as a comic describing largest contentful paint. And I was like, wow, that is awesome. And so, I mean, it's like kind of right, but it's also really wrong. And then, hey, Dolly 3, give me a comic describing largest contentful paint. And like, hey, why is this site so slow? Hey, that's correct. the largest contentful paint hat takes a soiling, and then of course it kind of goes off the rails with words. I'm sure if y'all have worked with Dolly a little bit, you've seen that same behavior. Just a little, I thought it was cool. So, largest contentful paint measures the time a website takes to show the user the largest content on the screen, ready, complete and ready for interaction. And so there's a little, illustration here. On the top, the hero image is the largest, content on the screen. It takes up the most horizontal and, well, I guess the most surface area or square footage. And it's loading last. And so it's loading at 0.7 seconds, and that is worse than the bottom film strip where the hero image appears right away in 0.2 seconds, and then other elements of the page fill in after it. And so you're targeting largest contentful paint of 2.5 seconds or less for at least 75% of page visits. Oh, wow, that seems really easy and straightforward. Actually, I'd be curious if y'all want to chime in and chat, like whether there's like any light bulb moments there or not. I think for me, like actually tracking down this explanation, like, oh, it makes sense. And then it comes into, okay, but how do I do this on my site? And we will get to diagnosing it a little bit later on. But before we do, I want to identify 3 common factors or contributing factors to a poor largest contentful paint score. The first is common factor is large unoptimized images. So images that are poorly compressed, they have excessively large file sizes or unnecessarily high resolutions. And so what would be happening there is, your page is loading, you have a hero image that takes up, say, 60% of the page, the initial page load, and that hero image is 2 megabytes. And so, hey, you know what, maybe everything on your site is set up so that, the HTML of the page is downloaded and the browser renders that, and okay, great, but you're on a slow 3G connection and it still got pulled 2 megabytes of image over the wire. And so it's just, the browser's waiting on that image being downloaded all the way before it can display it. And, your largest contentful paint score is negatively impacted by that. So, just recompressing images. I remember Pinch of Yum, we were trying to target, I think it was under 220 kilobytes for like large images, 1600 or 1800 pixel width. And then also responsive images are another technology that can help address largest contentful paint. Another factor that can negatively impact LCP score is render blocking JavaScript. So if you have too much JavaScript in the top of your page that blocks the render of the page, then that will negatively impact your LCP score. Common contributor there is, say an ad network. An ad, the header bidder tags will, block the rendering of the page so that they can fingerprint the browser and see who the visitor is, and then communicate with the ad server, figure out what ad to serve, and then pass that into the client. And all along, Google's counting and saying, hey, you know what, the page started rendering, but it hasn't loaded yet because there's this JavaScript that's blocking the rendering. Another one is uncached assets. And so, say you have a bunch of assets on your page and those assets have to be pulled from your origin server, for every request. So I'm going to use a little bit more specific terms. So by asset, I mean a style sheet or a JavaScript file, or also an image. And what I mean by an origin server is that typically your site is hosted in server in, say, Dallas Fort Worth or DC area or California. And then if a visitor is accessing your site from New York City, then their browser has to make a bunch of requests all the way to California for the data and then receive the data. And so those assets, if they're not cached in a global CDN, can, the request has to go all the way there and back and all the way there and back. And maybe there's 10 assets or 15 assets that are needed before the page can render. So those are kind of three common factors that can negatively impact largest contentful paint, according to Claude AI. Another little interlude. I'd be curious if y'all want to chime in on chat, whether you're using AI as a part of your day-to-day work and what you're using it for. I like Claude better than ChatGPT. I'm really experiencing the ChatGPT is getting lazy thing right now, and I use it. And in fact, I'll use it today. Jen is recording this talk. What I'll do is I'll use Whisper to transcribe that, and then I will have Claude summarize it for my internal notes on the contents of the talk. So largest contentful paint, first core web vital. Second core web vital is currently first input delay, but it will soon be interaction to next paint. And the distinction is that first input delay solely focuses on, okay, pages rendering. At what point is any input, say a button or text input on the screen available for the user to interact with? And then interaction to next paint will actually look at the entirety of the page lifecycle, so the entire time that the person's on the page, and measure that interactivity, because that's more aligned with real world user experience. And so I think I actually left the first input delay score on the top right. First input delay, the expected is under 200 or between 200 and 500. But just as a quick example, on the left, we have poor responsiveness. So we have poor interaction next paint. The user clicks the button or clicks the accordion, and it takes a half second for the accordion to display its content. On the right, we do have good responsiveness. The user is able to click on the accordion and the page responds right away and presents the content. So three common contributors to a poor interaction to next paint INP score: excessive DOM elements. Okay, don't get me started about excessive DOM elements. It always shows up on the report and I never know what to do about it. And maybe it's like comments or whatever. So a bunch of just HTML elements on the page that are difficult to, if you're using Page Builder, that is not the block editor, it probably adds a lot of DOM elements to the page. So another negative contributor to, or contributor to a poor INP score, unnecessary JavaScript. So just a bunch of JavaScript that's, maybe when the users click on the button, you have some JavaScript that's, re-rendering part of the page or firing some data off to an analytics system. And if you have too much of that, that can negatively impact INP score. And then the third that Claude gave me is expensive effects and animations. This can be as easy as carousels. I'm not sure how folks feel about carousels at this meetup.
They're poor for accessibility, and they tend to have low interaction rates.
They're also poor for my opinion of, I don't know, I don't like carousels. So I'm glad that we've shifted the window a little bit there. But anyways, so any sort of expensive event effects or animations can negatively impact INP, and that's a challenge. It's tough to balance. Hey, I'm a site owner. I want my site to have a certain amount of pizzazz and appeal and look cool to my audience. How do I balance that with making sure that the user experience is actually quite good? Next core web vital is CLS, cumulative layout shift. And this metric measures the unexpected shifting of web elements while the page is being rendered. And so it has some way to compute that, but we'll just look at the before and after. So on the left is our, this is a poor CLS. You can see that the page loaded partially and had some height I'll just even do there. So it has some height here, but not enough height for the images. And then the images load and the images push the text down on the page. And so this would be a page with a poor CLS score, and the poor CLS score is caused by the layout shift of the images. A page with a good CLS score sets the width and height. Oh, you know what? I didn't QA this. This is actually
Nope,
the same
that's
video
the same
twice.
video.
So what would happen on a site with a good CLS score is that actually the text would start, in where its final position would be, and the loading of the images wouldn't push the text down on the page. And I need to update that slide. And so, this page could have a good CLS score and still have a poor LCP score if those images were too large, took a long time to load, that sort of thing. And so that can be the interaction of the two metrics there. And the last, this is TTFB, time to first byte, isn't a core web vital, but it's an important web vital and something you should pay attention to, because it's actually a contributing factor to the other core web vitals. And time to first byte measures the time it takes for the browser to receive the first byte of response after it makes a request for the server. And I love this diagram because this to me is, at least as a software engineer, the perfect depiction of time to first byte. So when you load apple.com, oh, I want to buy one of those new MacBook Pro laptops. Your browser makes a request. It does a DNS lookup, does some other fancy DNS stuff. Hits the server, and then the server processes the request, prepares a response, and then it starts spitting back data. The browser starts downloading the data. It starts loading the DOM, and then you hit the page load. Page is loaded. So time to first byte is actually the first half of that, where the browser has received the first byte from the server. And if you're confused by that, we'll actually hit questions in just a sec again. Feel free to drop any questions you have about that in chat. So 3 common contributors to poor time to first byte score. One is any resource intensive themes or plugins. So, this is the classic, like, oh, you don't want too many plugins running on your site because they can slow your site down. I mean, you can actually have a lot of plugins running on your site as long as they're doing things efficiently. Even one plugin doing something inefficiently can negatively impact your time to first byte. And, plugins, can kind of hook into how WordPress runs and what it does. And if a plugin is always hooking in and always doing stuff that's computationally expensive, then that's going to negatively impact your time to first byte. The second contributing factor to poor time to first byte scores, your server location. So what, you're running an e-commerce site, and your audience and your customer base is probably primarily on the East Coast of the US. And if your server is in Singapore, then anytime someone wants to buy something, that request has to go all the way across the ocean, get added to the cart, check out I don't know why you host in Singapore, but cheaper or doing something dodgy. So the physical location, can actually have a pretty significant impact. And then related to resource intensive themes and plugins, any sort of database queries that your site might be doing. If you have an e-commerce site, often e-commerce sites do more complex database queries, and those can negatively impact your time to first byte score. Any questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple. So the first one is thoughts on WordPress Rocket or Perf Matters?
That's a great question. I don't have any, I think I have a little bit of experience with WP Rocket. In this next section, how do I improve core web vitals? I'm actually going to talk about what you might be looking at when you are evaluating a plugin to help improve your performance.
And then we got a couple of responses on what people are using for AI. So people using ChatGPT to do social media captions and help with some coding. Hopefully you remind it that it's bad at coding and needs to look up the reference again. I find I have to yell at it a lot. Someone else is using AI and they use Claude and Mac GPT to write
Nice.
custom functions and filters. They use Get Genie to help put together content on sites, and that's been working well for them to write long product descriptions. We have a question regarding a background looping video in their hero section. Are there any ways to improve this performance while keeping their background looping video, which is bad for accessibility?
Sure. So the performance aspects of that, again, core web vitals, we have LCP, largest contentful paint. We have, well, INP, interaction next paint, and we have CLS, cumulative layout shift. And so as far as Google is concerned, CLS is, your, video in the background. As long as there's not any layout shift as it's loading, then CLS is covered, you're fine there. If it's a video element, you want to set a height and width. If it's, I don't know if you can set it as like a background image. Yeah. So just make sure that there's no shifting going on to avoid CLS, negative CLS. INP probably won't impact that unless, I would, maybe use YouTube or some sort of paid video hosting provider, because they'll have optimized systems for making sure the video is served to the browser as quickly as possible. If that video is running off of your web server, most hosts typically don't have optimized systems for delivering video content, and so it may take be slower to start and that sort of thing. Hey, WordPress.com, we have VideoPress. VideoPress is optimized for video delivery. And then largest contentful paint, again, depending on how the video is loaded, I think you'll typically set a poster image, and so that would display when the video is first displayed. And if it's autoplaying, then the autoplay video would kick in after that. I think the thing that I'd really keep in mind is, I believe the phrase is multiplexed, making sure that when that video is played, the bit rate or kind of resolution is set based off of the connection quality. If it's, I'm on a, gig connection right here, fine to give me really high resolution video. For your, cheap Android phone on a 3G connection, you'd probably want to use a very low bitrate video, just out of respect for, what bandwidth they might have available. And also, go ahead.
Most of the mobile phones actually just block the background video completely.
Sure, yeah. That's easy enough too. Maybe you have some device detection, and on, mobile or low bandwidth devices, they're shown an image instead of a video.
The next comment was that they agree about carousels being non-ideal, but for some reason clients still like them. Then a
those
question
clients
on time to first byte, reducing initial server response time. Oh, is TTFB same as the error reduce initial server response time? Oh, they're asking, are the two errors the same? The
I
error
believe
time
so.
to first byte and reduce initial server response.
Yeah, I believe so. I
Using
need to confirm that. But
Rocket.net out of hosting in Sydney. So Rocket.net is usually pretty good. Are you using Cloudflare? Would be my question. Some sort of content delivery network to get things cached up and moving so they don't even interact with your server.
And the key there too is you can get a content delivery network for your assets, so your images, style sheets, and all that. There's, Cloudflare, for instance, has a full page cache. And so what that does is takes a copy of the front end of your site and distributes it to their, global CDN. And so, it's an important distinction, because in that case, it's also the HTML of the page that's cached globally, not just, the images, say, or the CSS files. So we will move on. Hey, some plugins that you can use. WP Rocket mentioned, Perf Matters mentioned, Jetpack Boost is a product that we offer. Hummingbird Pro is one I came across that I have any personal experience with. We will look at these plugins. I don't have a ton of, I know Jetpack Boost, but the others I don't have a ton of personal experience with. I actually, when I worked at Pinch of Yum, I was very opinionated. We use Cloudflare, and I deliberately didn't want to use any plugins. I just wanted to do everything myself as a software engineer. So, but we'll look at the, what a plugin might do in the context of, helping you improve largest contentful paint. And so we mentioned earlier 3 common, contributing factors to negative largest contentful paint score. The primary factors are generally the server response time for the initial HTML document, and then the server response time for the LCP resource. And then secondary factors include, render blocking JavaScript, as we mentioned before, CSS, and then overly large or incorrectly sized images. Now you'll see in this screenshot, oh, Wix has a bad LCP score. It's 2.8 seconds. I find that actually marketing sites typically do, because they have a bunch of tracking JavaScript on the page, and it just slows rendering down. But on the so you run the URL and page speed insights, and tucked away in the performance section is the largest contentful paint accordion element, and you click on that and it will actually flag for you what Google sees as the largest contentful paint element on your page. In the case of Wix, it's actually this text. It's identified that this text is the LCP element, and then it gives you broken down into 4 phases, the contributing factors to the timing of the LCP score. And so in the case of Wix, TTFB 650, that's bad, bordering. I mean, really bad is like a minute or sorry, a second or 2 seconds. Good is like 200 or less, 200 milliseconds or less, 250 milliseconds or less. No load delay, no load time, but then there's some render delay going on. And so I didn't look beyond this, but probably what's happening is a bunch of JavaScript running. Maybe this is a custom font and it needs to pull the custom font across the web too. And the browser is doing a bunch of stuff before it deems that, hey, this text can be rendered. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullet ever, and it can be a variety of compounding factors that contribute to a poor score. In this, so how a plugin might improve your largest contentful paint, page caching. I know WP Rocket in particular, and I imagine Perf Matters, have a full page cache built into the product. So that would reduce your time to first byte. More so on the HTML document, if you have an image as your largest contentful paint element, that image typically is pulled off the server pretty quick, and it isn't impacted by how long WordPress takes to render. gzip compression. So plugins can add gzip compression, your server can add gzip compression, and that just compresses the file like it's a zip file and serves that across the web. Critical CSS. So if you have a large style sheet, a large style sheet on your site, and the browser would need to download the entire style sheet in order to know how to paint your page, you can actually take the most important part of that style sheet, shove it in the header, and then lazy load the rest of it. And so that the most important part of the style sheet should correlate with what appears at the top of the page. And so then that just comes in along with the body of the page, and the browser can render it right away. And then it loads the rest of the style sheet to render other parts of the page. Deferring non-essential JavaScript, so just telling the busybody JavaScript to load later and run later. Image CDN, again, we talked about, hey, maybe maybe don't want to subject your visitors to always requesting, requesting images from Sydney or Singapore, and instead you want to put those images all around the world. Well, you do that with an image CDN, and then the browser will just download whichever image is closest to it in physical location. Concatenating and minifying CSS and JavaScript, and preloading resources are another couple of things that a plugin might do to help improve your largest contentful pane. And so, unfortunately, web technologies aren't simple, and there can be a variety of compounding factors that negatively impact your core Web Vital scores on your website. And if there is a silver bullet, it is keep it simple. So, keep your animation simple, keep the kind of number of assets on your page simple. Keeping everything as simple as possible will make it much easier to manage the overall performance of the site. And hosting is an important component to it. And so I'm gonna, I think y'all have probably heard the would you pay $5 for a shrimp dinner? Probably not. You probably want to spend at least $25 on a shrimp dinner. Similarly, hosting, you kind of get what you pay for. But to kind of talk you through it with a metaphor. So if you pay for hosting that has high quality hardware and sufficient resources, it's comparable to, hey, say you're running a factory and your factory is is doing a lot of winter season and holiday products, and they kind of applied the metaphor of high quality hardware and sufficient resources to the factory is, hey, when there's a lot of demand for your product, you have capacity in your factory to actually handle that demand and produce the product and produce the product at a high quality result. If you don't have high quality hardware in your factory or sufficient resources in your factory, then you get a bunch of demand and the factory falls over and you're unable to fulfill that demand, and your business suffers. Continuing with that factory metaphor, a good web host will have full page cache and object caching built in. And with the factory metaphor in mind, that's as though you've actually manufactured some of the goods in advance and you have those stockpiled. And so when visitors come in or when visitors make requests, the products are actually ready to go out the door right away instead of having to go through the manufacturing process before they can be shipped. And so, without an object cache, your website will have to do a lot more computation in order to serve a response to the visitor. With an object cache, a lot of the data is already pre-computed, and that response can be delivered faster. And then lastly, a good web host will have a built-in global edge cache in CDN, and it's similar to the factory metaphor in that, say your factory's in Singapore and you're receiving orders from New York. Well, without a global edge cache or CDN, customer makes purchase from New York, that request has to go all the way to Singapore. Maybe you do have a object cache in place, and so there's a product that's ready to go out the door right away, but then it has to get shipped all the way back to New York. The global edge cache and CDN is like strategically distributing your project throughout the globe so that someone buying your product from New York, gets a copy of it that's already staged in Philly. And so, next day they have their product in your product in hand. So with that, thanks for having me today. What remaining questions y'all have?
So I guess we'll get back to that list of plugins. So I know that you have only experience with Jetpack Boost, but I figure I
Sure.
can chime in on the other three.
Cool.
So I last used Hummingbird probably 3 years ago, and it was definitely one of the worst experiences with a caching and optimization plugin. It was just an incredibly frustrating experience trying to nitpick out a ton of different settings for every single plugin that I had on the entire site and every script that every plugin loaded. So I never went back to it.
Sure.
WP Rocket versus Perf Matters. So Perf Matters I've found is better at fine tuning things, especially for my e-commerce sites. Perf Matters does not cache. So if you don't have server caching, then you need to get another plugin. The one that Perf Matters recommends is called Cache Enabler. It's a super
Cool.
simple, lightweight plugin. WP Rocket is both optimization and caching. So if you have caching on your server, you may not want Rocket to actually duplicate that, but you can turn it off. It is pretty good, but I've found that I can fine tune more and do a little bit more most of the time with Perf Matters. So for most sites nowadays, I go with Perf Matters. And then Greg commented in the chat that he had tried Jetpack Boost, but it kept running into timeout errors.
Bummer. If you want to try it again or want my help diagnosing on the next slide, I have my email address and you're more than welcome to drop me an email and happy to help out.
I am just going to put that email address into the chat, so if anyone wants to copy it off, they can.
And other questions or feedback on my presentation, or feel free to email me, whatever you want. I'm pretty good with email.
Yeah, I don't see any questions coming up in the chat. Cheryl did comment that she's generally doing pretty well with light speed on her server. Otherwise, I'm not seeing any questions. We have some thank yous coming through in the chat. So thank you again, Daniel. I'm gonna take over the screen share so I can show my closeout slides. All right. So if you are looking for WordPress help outside of our usual meetup time slots, please feel free to check our information page. And I will put this link into the chat. Our next meetup will be on January 24th at 7 p.m. We'll be talking about online privacy in 2024, specifically about the new laws in the US for several of the states. And then in February, we will have our next Ask Me Anything, which is pretty much anything WordPress. And we hope to see you guys then.